hitting New York hospitals, upper New York hospitals. And Fletcher Allen has shut down its network. All surgeries for the next couple of days are scheduled off the books. Anybody you know that's heading that way, you might want to give them a call and let them know there's something up. They were down today, pretty much phones and everything. It's amazing how much this little box that we're looking into has crept in and controls our lives.
Any questions for our elected official, our state reps? Sal?
Yes, I just wanted to say that, Bob, I'll connect with you later about the person who wants to work in the polls.
Sounds good.
TJ?
I just want to personally thank Carol Odie, who responded to an email of mine about COVID relief money. Really struggled. I'm a personal LLC, and so I've gotten all that in. And thank you so much, Carol. I really appreciated your attention to that.
You are so welcome. And I'm one of a team of legislators who, when the Department of Labor had so many troubles trying to help people, Bob Hooper, Gino Sullivan, and I out here in the New North End alone, we joined with Republicans, Democrats, Progressives, and we helped 2,300 people or more to get that help. So I am so glad that we were able to help you, TJ, and really grateful that you said something. So.
With that, I don't see other questions. We'll move over to City Council. Sarah, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I just want to let you know that I just heard from Franklin, and he is traveling and is in a no Zoom zone. So he's not able to join us. And I happen to know that Ali had a committee meeting backed up to this. So I'm assuming he may come, but he may be late because he's in a committee meeting. We had not an emergency, but a special city council meeting also just now, basically to pass a resolution about our concerns about the transfer of power, depending on what happens on the election next week. And as a city, we want to make sure all know that we have those concerns, and we may or may not have to be prepared for that. In terms of this last month, there's actually been a couple of exciting things, and it's although it's been sort of a slower month, which is good. I don't mind that at all. I hope by now that most of you have been able to get down to the opening of City Hall Park. It's really quite impressive, and I think it's something that we all can be pretty proud of. It'll be, I think, a go-to place for a lot of tourists, and hopefully we'll get tourists back soon enough. So that was exciting. Just on Monday, I went to the opening of the Champlain Inn, which is something that the city's been working hard on. It's a low barrier shelter for the homeless, and it's a place where folks will be able to go in the wintertime particularly, but it's going to be a year-round shelter, which is really critically important. And these are folks who may not meet all the criteria for other shelters. And in years past, we've done it quite short term during the coldest months. And the state, and thanks to the state legislature, have seen the wisdom of putting resources more permanently. Many of those folks were taken care of with motel vouchers, which is not really an effective way to serve those folks. It's an expensive way to serve those folks. It's being run by A New Place, which is a homeless organization in Burlington in cooperation with Cathedral Square, who's got a lot of experience in property management. So that'll be a real plus. They're working very fast. They've got CARES money from the federal government. What they've got to get open by December 1st. So that's a real kind of rush. You all saw and I all heard about the conversation we had on whether or not to have fire pits during the COVID season. And I can say I got lots of opinions on both sides. We decided at the end of the day to follow the advice of the Board of Health, and there's actually several people from our neighborhood happen to serve on that. It's a very thoughtful, well-written thing, but we are in the process of just getting clarification out to people. Propane fire pits and electric fire pits are allowed, and we're going to get some background from the fire department and get that out to everybody so you know kind of what is allowed and what isn't allowed. And we'll get that out to you as soon as we hear back from the fire department. While I'm speaking of the fire department, just today, Representative Hooper and others asked about some updates on the ambulance for the New North End. If you'll recall, when we voted the budget last June, we made a decision on the city side to delay tax increases. That was not true on the school side. And as part of that, we chose to delay the increase for the fire department, but they still are on track. In the third quarter, they're going to hire and train the ambulance staff that will provide for them. And they should have all that ambulance fleet online by late spring. Although not really related to that, but they actually have in fact moved one of the ambulances to fire station 4. I think I always get them confused because of how tight things are in fire station 2, particularly around COVID. So they made a decision to sort of spread them out. One thing that's important to understand with the ambulance is it's not really the ambulance vehicle that's the problem. It's the amount of staff to staff it up that costs the money, and where do you kind of put them is question of the day. I'm not sure if Councillor Jang's joining us, so I'll just kind of keep on a roll here.
He hasn't.
There's been lots of conversation about City Place. We're in a holding pattern. We are in legal discussions on both sides. And it is our hope, or it's certainly my hope, that this will proceed to a mediation, and that is actively being discussed. So I'm hopeful soon that it may end up in mediation. That's kind of all I've really got to report. I think the press has kept everybody to date, but it's a difficult and complicated kind of issue. I heard Bob or Carol mention the TIF extension, which is really good generally for the city, but there's a significant issue relative to City Place because we are so behind and had depended, and a big portion of the construction of the public right-of-ways and the street is needing to be funded by the TIF monies. That's an up in the air factor that is significant. And I don't know how that's going to play out in the negotiation with whatever new owner group there comes to be. I think it will clearly get raised again in the next legislative season, and is something that we as a city need to be concerned about. If the legislature chooses not to extend this TIF long enough to include City Place, that will be a problem. But I don't have any more details on that. Kind of in that same vein, the mayor let us know that whatever proposals we have for Memorial Auditorium are still on hold. We simply don't have the resources and don't believe that it would be prudent to bring anything to the voters, certainly not in this next year. It will take probably some level of bonding to renovate it. And so I think in the short run, it's sitting there waiting to figure out, you know, going into fiscal year 22, what options might there be. Just trying to think of other items. Kind of that's a laundry list. There's a lot of work obviously going around the police department, and I'm very pleased that we're having Kyle join us. So he'll be a lot of updates. I see Shireen here with us, and she's on the police commission as well as the joint committee. And so they, hopefully the two of them can provide all of the updates that are necessary.
I wanted to add one quick thing, which is we, Bob and I and the state legislators, all of them are going to be doing a domestic terrorism and terrorism update tomorrow at 12:30, and with our own Burlington Mike Sherling leading that, because he's the public safety person for the state of Vermont. So we'll be ready or informed about any kind of acts of terror over the next weeks.
I can't, Bob, did you have a question?
Yeah, Sarah, following up on the two things, actually. The one thing I saw on City Place had the old 14-story looking, I hope that's still out.
Yes, they are proceeding, as I understand it, in the planning process. And they have a new schematic, which is I think it's around 10 stories, but I'm not recalling. It's a much, I'm going to call it square building. It really looks nice. It has primarily housing and retail in it. As far as I know, the hotel is not in it. They are doing a presentation, so that may be something that we want to ask them to come and present. It is a very schematic point, but the old one is definitely out. And I only know what I've seen. They did do a presentation last week to the Ward 2 and 3 NPA. So they're out there presenting it. I think they haven't widely offered to do that simply because they're in this negotiation phase with the city. One of the planning requirements was that they specifically go to 2 and 3 because it is in Ward 2 or 3.
So second question, if I might. When Moreau first ran for office, the first question I asked him was why we didn't have a fire, why we didn't have an ambulance out here. And it's been that long. But the thing that bothers me is the response usually is about the number of calls and from where they go to where they go. Nobody seems to look deeply into what the calls are for. Like a fight downtown seems to be less serious than a heart attack out in the New North End. I think that should be weighed in the conversation. I put that in a Facebook post that you probably read. But that seems to be kind of an important factor in this determination. So when the time comes to move the ambulance someplace else, I don't think it should be moved. We got it. We're going to keep.
Yeah, I mean, I have asked about it. It's the staffing that's driving it. As I said, it's not the physical ambulance. And I am told, and I'll try to dig deeper, that significantly more calls come from the inner city, and not just downtown, but kind of,
yeah,
as opposed, and the upside and the downside of the fact that we have several nursing homes is they in fact have staff, particularly the nursing homes do, not the housing projects. And in fact, there are more senior housing projects downtown, but it's a valid question, and I'll see if I can find out some more information about that.
Oh, they have to bill it, so there would be a code. Thanks.
Yes. Yeah.
Sarah, would you have a contact for City Place presenting at the NPA?
Oh, I can, yes, I can. I will, their consultant is a fellow by the name of Jess Glassberg. I'll ask him. And Jesse Beck from Freeman, French and Freeman is leading, or at the minute anyways, their design team. So I'll check in with them. And if you tell me which month or date, I'll see if they're available.
Okay, and Jeff Comstock, you had a question?
Yeah, Sarah, can I want to follow up on the ambulance conversation. So when you said third quarter, is that third quarter 2021 or third quarter of our city fiscal year? How do we
Well,
reconcile?
yeah, it's actually the fiscal year. So it would be January, February, March. It's not actually not of the calendar year. So as I understand it, in around about February or early part of 21, they're going to start hiring and training I think it's like 9 people to run the ambulance to get them on board for the fourth quarter of the city fiscal year.
All right. Yeah, thank you. Because from what I remember of that conversation when we were considering the bond,
Okay.
when we talked to the fire chief, is that he made it very clear that the city has the vehicle. It's just a matter of hiring and training the additional staff people.
Well, and what we voted on was not a bond. We voted on a tax increase to pay the salaries. So
yeah, that's correct. Right.
That's what we delayed is the implement. And so they effectively, we didn't call out the tax increase, but we chose to budget additional staff later in the year out of the city regular budget.
Yeah, I remember the mayor saying at his address that budget address that he was choosing not to implement the public safety tax increase.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when will that likely go into effect?
That would be July 1 of 21, so the next fiscal year.
Okay, thank you.
And there was a couple of other taxes that were all delayed until the next fiscal year.
At Hurlbert, you had a question?
I do. Thank you, Jeff. Sarah, I just wanted to ask you real quickly, you're on a small committee that has been working towards a just cause termination for landlords.
Mm-hmm.
And being a real estate broker, I'm working with a lot of clients right now that are unwilling to consider buying property in Burlington for investment, and a lot that are considering unloading with this new law that's really going to dampen and strip them of their rights to terminate an agreement between a landlord and a tenant that expires, and it will just go on forever and ever. Can you just speak for a second about why you're supporting it?
Sure. I mean, it's something. It's a tenant issue that I'm very familiar with. In my work with Vermont Housing Finance Agency and Cathedral Square, all operate under the concept of cause evictions. There's 5 states that operate under that concept. There's probably 50 communities. And I know there has been a lot of what I think is kind of not good information or misinformation. So I encourage everyone to look at our the CDNR website of the city, Community Development Neighborhood Revitalization website, which will provide you with some update. The concept is that, to provide tenant stability and family stability, people really should be given a reason why they're being asked to leave. And it's worked well in the states that have it, and it's worked well with assisted properties. It has not affected the real estate market. There needs to be, and I think this is where there's a lot of unclarity. And what I'm personally working on right now is making sure we're clear on adding in exemptions, owner-occupied properties, properties that want to be where you'd want a family member to be moved in, properties that might be taken off the market, properties that have sublets in it. So if that's, we had quite a significant meeting last night, and we're meeting again next week to try to provide a lot more clarity around kind of what would be in and what would be out. One of the complicating factors in state law versus municipal law is to do anything different than state law, you've got to go to the legislature to get a charter change. I refer to it as asking permission. So the question is, how broad or specific should that permission be? The draft charter change was really quite broad. I think with the intent that this would be a long process, it would take about 18 months, and you'd really get the details in the ordinance. I am well aware that people feel uncomfortable with that. So I think the work we have to do in this next amount of time is to provide more clarity about kind of what's in and what's not in. And I'm happy to answer more questions.
It's really difficult for me to field questions to property owners when they feel their rights are being stripped, which they are, if they don't have a right, once a lease is up, which is a legal agreement between the two parties, to be forced into a forever cycle of never being able to ask that tenant to leave for any reason. Why? I'm challenged at being able to answer that question.
Well, and I'm happy, Matt, to spend more time offline. I mean, I think it's also hard for families who just get asked to read. You know, no cause eviction has been used a lot against low-income families, families of color, who get asked. In the tension in the city of Burlington is, if you have a more attractive set of young college kids who rent your apartment and you just kind of don't like that other family, it really creates instability. Where it has worked, I mean, I think if it's well written, it is not, I mean, many provinces in Canada, countries in Western Europe, it's not such a new concept. I mean, New Jersey's had it since 1985, and it has not affected their rental market. Several states have more recently just adopted it, but there's hundreds of communities with it. So I think it's important for people to, and it really is in hot markets where I think is necessary.
Ellie, you're a recent addition to our meeting. Do you have any updates from the city councilor side?
Yes, couple of updates, and I think one of them is, have you all voted yet?
Yes.
Is the question. You know, and I think it is everyone at the city council, and we just had a special meeting just about that. Yeah, and what I've been doing is just making sure that maybe vulnerable communities are voting and have the right information. And those are things that we do that many people do not know about. And we try to bring so many communication. And again, I think the process about voting and the official ballot boxes, you know, why we did not have one here in the New North End is a big problem. And it is a problem that many people in this community have felt over the years, that it seemed as if the New North End is always forgotten on important items such as this. And I think we collectively try to make sure that we have an official ballot box deposit where people can come and deposit their ballot. And it was a big fight. But finally, we had one. It was limited hours, and it's here in the New North End. And I think next year or next time around, how can we strive to do better, you know? And yeah, that's one. And the other one is specific to the bike lanes here in the New North End. And I think soon the cones will be taken away. There is also a video that will tell a story. And the video will be made by a UVM professor who's a cinematographer. And we identified 2 people who like the bike lane, but we're still trying to identify 2 people who did not like the process, who still don't like the bike lane, that will be interviewed. And that video will be posted will be housed in many different areas. And if there is anyone here, I see TJ raising hand, if you would like to participate in it, private message me, and then we'll make sure that you will get interviewed on that. Yes, and I just captured a little bit of this conversation about just cause eviction. Personally, I do believe that the process we established to get to where we are is already flawed. Already flawed. And I sent an communication to Sarah, Councillor Carpenter, and just thinking about, okay, now what's the next step? The process is not good. And to me personally, this is not how we should do business as we move forward. If it is in front of me tomorrow, I don't feel comfortable voting in it, voting in support of it, right? But it seems on the 27th, we will get another update. And then from there, my vote will be dependent on what we want to do as we move forward. Yeah, and I think that is it. And so I'm sorry, just joining because I just log out another meeting, committee meeting to be here.
No
Yeah.
problem. Carol mentioned that for you. We want to make sure that the school commissioners have enough time. So I think we'll jump to them. I see Martine and Monica and Kendra. You guys are up, and we have our superintendent with us as well, Tom Flanagan.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, everyone. It's great Tom was able to join us this evening. And I was going to start by talking about, I think everybody is curious, anxious about what's going on with BHS and the BTC complex. Since the last NPA, I believe we've had 2 meetings that essentially focused on our situation at BHS. One was on September 29th, it was kind of called the town hall, and one was on October 20th. And at our September 29th meeting, we had several state agencies with us, including Dr. Mark Levine, the Vermont Health Commissioner, Sarah Vos, state toxicologist, Lori Cragen. She's with the Vermont Department of Health, I think second in command to Levine. Trish Copolino, who's with the VT Department of Environmental Conservation, and also Kim Tisa, who was an EPA representative at this meeting. And many of you might be wondering what are PCBs. PCB stands for polychlorinated biphenyls, and they used them a lot in construction materials until 1978 when the US banned them. They are found, so a lot of buildings that haven't been remodeled since that time, 78, which includes a lot of our schools, will have PCBs naturally occurring in air. They are, often it was used for caulking or like ballasts of fluorescent lights. PCBs cause cancer in animals, and it's a probable human carcinogen, but also has non-cancer effects, like it affects the immune system, reproductive system, nervous and endocrine system. And the Vermont Department of Health recommends a level of like airborne PCBs of 50 nanograms per meter cubed. And so this is an extremely low level. The EPA maximum level for a high school, I think the levels are lower for younger kids, but for a high school, the EPA has a number of 600 nanograms per meter cubed. And a lot of us are wondering why Vermont's is 40 times less than that. At that meeting, we learned that PCBs are everywhere. They're in our diet and our blood. They're in rivers, lakes, parks, and the PCB levels at the high school were measured they were started to be measuring back July 2019. But then we had Fuss and O'Neill come in beginning of September and measure the PCB levels at the high school. And you folks probably remember we're doing hybrid days. So half the kids went to school the Tuesday after Labor Day. And then our superintendent felt that he had to close the schools. Well, some of the levels were really out the roof. And I don't know if I'm able to share my screen, but I just have a nice graphic that was
Be able to.
presented to us by the Vermont Department of Health, essentially summarizing our the levels in the high school buildings. So on the left, these are buildings A through E, and on the right is building F, which houses BTC, I think the daycare center, and on top. And you'll see the scale for this F building, it goes up to 6,000. So this is an alarming level, over 6,000 nanograms per meter cubed for one of the rooms in building F. And the average is 2,200. So that we're not sure what we're going to be doing with that building at this point. A lot of remediation, but the rest of the high school, the maximum building, the maximum PCB level was measured at 300, and the average levels are, looks like between 50 and 150. So, so I like this graphic because it, you know, puts it there. The Department of Health recommendation level is down here at 15. So this dashed line way down here. When I asked Sarah Vos about other states, what other states have as levels, she essentially said, typically states don't have their own recommendations, and they'll go by the EPA recommendation, which is up at 600. We've seen that Europe uses a level of 300 nanograms per meter cubed. So, so, you know, we have issues with contamination at the high school. I think in July of 2019, PCBs were found under the F building elevator pit. And at that point, also PAHs were found in soils, so urban soil. And right now, we're looking at doing a pilot project where we'll start removing materials in one area of the building, like remediation, like perhaps taking out some of the ballasts of the fluorescent lights, and then we go in and retest and see what that does to the airborne PCB levels. At this point for BTC, we found locations for in-person instruction, and Kendra will talk more about that. But for BHS, all the classes are still mostly online. The sports are in person, outside, and music is outside. Some of the PE classes are in person. So I don't think I'm wrong if I'd say we're desperate to find a place to house the high school students, because in-person instruction works a lot better for most of our students. At our October 20th meeting, there was a lot of public comment. There's a parent group that also consists of doctors and local experts that doesn't agree with the Vermont Department of Health standard of 50 nanograms per meter cube. You know, we talked about the strong push to find spaces to house BHS instruction. And let me share my screen again, because I just wanted to share with you one slide that we were presented with 3 options. So the first option is to try to get back into BHS as soon as possible. Either by leveling the PCB levels or getting our Department of Health to approve a higher level in air, and then continue the re-envisioning project as it was originally planned. Because I think most of you know, the plan was to house the students in the building while construction is going on. A couple other options were to move to an alternate location if we can secure one. And there is a space that our leaders are looking at downtown. But this, would cost a few million, well, it would cost rent and it would cost retrofitting the building so that we could have classrooms in there. But still you wouldn't have like a field nearby. So the attractive thing about that would be that then the re-envisioning could happen without the students occupying the room, and it would be easier, to get the construction done. And then the third alternative would be to, move the kids into this alternate location. And then we're not sure about the site, but tear down the building, whatever, build a completely brand new high school. And so that's kind of a far-fetched idea. It would cost a lot more money. We'd probably have to go out to the voters, and there'd probably be, well, we heard from Marty Spalding that it would be like an 18-month lead to get plans for that. A fourth option would be to kind of take a step back. We have the pandemic, the bond was passed 2 years ago. So this November election 2 years ago is when we passed the $70 million bond. But since then, we now have the pandemic. We've discovered all these contaminants. So a lot of complications. So one idea would be to step back, try to get the kids back into the building as soon as possible, but deal with the contaminations. So we have some big decisions to make in the next few weeks because there's a push for getting the kids to have some in-person instruction as soon as possible. We're aiming for January, well, ideally January at the latest, unless we can get something lined up with UVM, because UVM students leave end of November and don't come back until beginning of February. Or at least on Wednesdays, the other schools are empty, and at least have high school kids get 1 day a week in person. So I will let Kendra talk about BTC.
Great. Thanks, Monica. And follow up to a few things that you had mentioned. I did want to let everybody know that there's a survey that we have put out about some of these options and just priorities that you want to let the district know. It's for everybody. You don't have to be a BHS parent. It's also for community members. So we've sent that out to BHS families, but it's also on our website, and the deadline is tomorrow. So if you have strong feelings one way or another, or you just want to share your feedback, we'd love to hear it. We really appreciate the support of the community. This is difficult choices and decisions, as Monica mentioned. And so we'd love to hear from you. So please go ahead and fill out that form when you get a chance. I did want to also just say a plug for the other schools is that we're back to 4 days in person on all the other schools. So I don't want to just, that's been a huge accomplishment. And so that K-5 is back in person 4 days a week. So that is a great success. So while BHS is a struggle and we are really working hard to get those kids in person learning as fast as we can, we've had some good success with our other schools and getting that back to 4 days a week. So I just wanted to also mention what we're doing with BTC. Monica showed you the chart where you saw the levels of PCB contaminations were really, really high. So most likely, I could say almost in all likelihood, we're not going to be back there. So we have housed all of the almost 300 students that currently make up the Burlington Tech Center. And really, it's a shout out to the new BTC director, Jason Gingold, and Victor Prusak, who's the coordinator of engagement, Tom Flanagan. A nice team has really worked hard to get those kids the in-person learning, and they have all been housed in other locations. We do have 11 sending schools that come to our Burlington Tech Center. I think it's about 11, and we offer 14 programs. So we don't, when we think about technical education, it is not what technical education used to be. I mean, we have programs from auto tech to aviation to criminal justice to culinary arts, digital media laboratories. We have design and illustration. We've got our culinary program. We have health sciences. You know, we have pre-tech and human services. So we just got so many programs. And I think it's important that we all know this, because I know that I didn't know that for a long time, that this district offered all these opportunities for our kids. So it was really important that we find spaces to continue these programs. And I have to say the partnerships in this community have been fantastic for BTC. And I'll just give a quick list of, they've been housed at the airport, St. Mark's Church, Cambrian Rise, North Avenue Alliance Church, King Street Youth Center, Community Sailing Center, the East End Auto, the First Unitarian Universalist Society, and there's even a couple more. So we're very thankful and appreciative that these programs could be housed. So that was the first big lift. And the next big lift is BHS. Our Horizons program, we have 2 alternative programs, is also at St. Mark's Church, and our On Top program is at Rock Point School. So now it's the question of what to do with BHS. And I'm sure Superintendent Flanagan, you probably have some more things that you want to say about that.
Sure. Yeah, I don't want to take too much time, so I'll just, and Monica and Kendra, you all really explained it well. So the only thing I would add is that when we made this initial decision to close BHS, it was at the strong recommendation of both the Vermont Department of Health and the Environmental Protection Agency together in a room with our consultants saying it's not safe to go in those buildings. Since then, there's been significant advocacy. I actually, at one of our school board meetings, asked for advocacy, and I love the outpouring of support from the community. A lot of that advocacy had originally moved toward questioning sort of the science behind the numbers, the Vermont numbers around PCBs of 15 nanograms per cubic meter. And those numbers are, we just met that Open BHS group, members of that Open BHS group just met the day before yesterday with Dr. Levine and learned more about the science behind the numbers and left the meeting saying we should no longer push to get back into the building. So I wanted to make sure you had that because it's one of those 3 options, and the options in the survey, we're not asking you to vote for an option, but we're just trying to kind of test or hear where people are. But I wanted you to have the most up-to-date information, which is that the group that had been really advocating for that, I don't want to say where the whole group is, but members of that group did hear from Dr. Levine and Dr. Vos and Lori Cragen and came away thinking, okay, our advocacy now really needs to be finding an alternative space while we better understand the PCBs. The PCBs are in the air. They're really high in the F building, higher than anyone that we worked with had ever seen. And so it was pretty significant. And they're also in the soil. And now they're testing down into the soil to see how far down they go into the soil. We don't know yet fully the answer to that. We should have an answer to that this week or early next week. So that's kind of the current state. We do have pretty advanced conversations ongoing with a downtown space that could house all of our students at one time, all 970 students. That's not the only option, and that option is complicated for multiple reasons. And so we are also, continuing to investigate other opportunities like trailers like mobile classrooms and other things. So I think the big thing is that this is going to be a cost. I mean, the cost estimates for Macy's or for trailers are somewhere between over 2 to 3 years, or somewhere between $5 and $10 million. So it's a big lift for the district, and the school board chair Wool and I will be asking for a meeting with the governor to talk more about this, to really seek state aid to support our efforts here. Because while this is happening in Burlington, many schools in our state were built in the 1960s. Burlington High School was 1963. I think that's the BTC, the Technical Center, that back building with the high levels, was 1964. So you know, it's a bigger problem than Burlington, but we are dealing with it now. In just to provide a little more detail around the work around getting BHS students back into person, we do have about a quarter of our students participating in sports, 295 students or so, which has been amazing for them to come back together in person, but still 3/4 of our students are not involved in those activities. So we want to get them back in person. We are currently looking at our middle schools, and primarily Edmonds Middle and Elementary School, actually, to have to run high school for a day at the middle school and the elementary school on the Wednesday when the elementary students aren't there, and obviously doing a deep cleaning before and after, and so that's our immediate planning. We're also reaching out to UVM, as Monica mentioned, to really put some additional pressure on. We've already asked once and been told no. We're asking again and just trying to move up the food chain to ask for space. They're going away. Students are not going to be on campus after Thanksgiving. So there's a couple months there where we could achieve 4 days a week if we could get the agreement of the university. So we're working on that for kind of a midterm, and then short midterm, and then a longer midterm is this alternate space. And then we have this big decision to make about continuing the re-envisioning plan or rethinking the re-envisioning plan. So big items on the table for the city and for the district.
We could open it up for questions if people
Okay,
have, I'm
great.
sure people have questions.
Yeah, we have about 10 minutes for questions. Ali.
Yes, thank you. And I have to say, Tom, thank you so much. I think, you coming in and grappling with all of this and doing it also with so much grace and including also the community in the conversation is just exceptional. I have to say that. Thank you so much. And the first question that I have is basically, how do we now treat PCB, knowing that now it also contaminated the soil? Do we know? And also, are we thinking about a different location to house Burlington High School for the new construction or what? Those are the first two questions.
So the soil, we know there are PCBs in the soil around almost the entire perimeter of the high school. We've known that for a while. And we know that, and that happens because there are PCBs in the caulking of the windows. So they're all around the window frames. And what happens is when they get rained on or the weather, they kind of drip down and they drip into the soil. So that's expected. The question is, are there PCBs deeper in the soil? So there was fill soil brought in for the construction of the building. And there's a question about whether or not the fill soil could have been contaminated. Not that it was, but we don't know. So that's what we need to really understand is are there PCBs deeper in the soil? And we will know more about that this week or next week. Should be early next week, if not this week.
I know many people have questions, but I'll leave it to that. Thank you so much again.
Thank you. Jeff.
Yeah, to Superintendent Flanagan and the school board folks, have you ventured into the conversation about using the other school facilities in the district, like all the elementary schools and the middle school, to have school session for the high school students at the other end of the day. Given of all the physiological research we've heard about how well teenagers function at the end of the day as opposed to at the early end of the day, could we use the second half of the day for the high school students at all of the school buildings that are already in session? Thank you.
Yes, so we are first of all gonna be using, our plan is to use the middle school and elementary school on Wednesday when those schools are not in session. So we're currently in K through 5 on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. So Wednesday is a day that we can use. That is step one. I understand that's not your question. Your question is about other days and how we could utilize the building on other days. And I think there are, if we continue to go further down this path without another solution, we are going to need to consider creative and innovative and different solutions like that. In the very immediate, it is extremely challenging to pull that off because our teachers teach across multiple grade levels. So you can't have teachers necessarily, like you wouldn't be able to have all the 9th graders in one building, all the 10th graders in another building, right? And so it's logistically not possible with the current schedule. So we would have to reschedule the building. And so that's just a really massive lift. Even getting in one day a week on Wednesday is a really big lift. That's going to require me negotiating with our unions and doing a lot of scheduling and planning to get to that point. And our goal is to get there in mid-November. But again, I have to work that out with our labor partners. So I hear that. I think we've all heard or seen kind of a split schedule, right? Where there's been an AM and a PM. And if we continue to go down this road and there's not a solution, in a different building, in trailers at UVM, we're going to need to consider those types of things as we shift into the second semester.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll just pipe up, Jeff. We have 3 minutes until our next segment.
All right.
I have a question if I can go.
Is that Mark?
Yes, it is.
All
This is
right,
Mark
Mark.
Barlow. So I did complete the survey today, and for the long range plans for Burlington High School, on option number 3, we have an agreement with the city on debt policy that we made when I was on the board, and there's, I believe, very little or no additional capacity to bond further. We've already proposed bonding of $109 million already. And so I was wondering how we would pay bond anymore for a new school. And secondly, we should look to South Burlington's recent example of a community that doesn't have any more capacity in its taxpayers to pay for additional bonding. So if we want to build a new school instead of continuing with the re-envisioning project, it seems as though we would need to find the $50+ million extra dollars that we would need to do so from somewhere other than additional bonding. And I guess it's a comment / question.
Yeah, it's a legitimate question, and we are going to need help. I mean, to me, we are in an emergency situation, and we need aid. So the long-term push, and the reason our taxes are as high as they are, particularly around schooling, is because we have an inequitable funding model that disproportionately under finance or overburdens the taxpayers. And so that's just a problem that we need to figure out. And there was a lot of traction on that last spring, right before COVID kind of closed everything down and took over everyone's lives. There was some significant traction. So I know there's interest Representative Odie and Senator Baruth I've talked to about this, and there's traction across the state because it doesn't just, and I'm sure you know, Mark, too, it doesn't just impact us, it impacts smaller districts in the Northeast Kingdom and sort of, school districts all over the state and different parts of the state. So I think we should be pushing incredibly hard when we get back into session on the weighted funding, pupil funding formula. The other thing is construction aid. We haven't had construction aid in the state. We're one of the few states in the country that doesn't have construction aid. Our buildings are old, and now we have a problem, right? That seems like it's going to be not just a problem here in Burlington. So I think that seems like there's not a lot of traction, and it's further away. But I think we should be really yelling and screaming about those things. And so that doesn't directly help your question. If we go out to bond, or if we have this bonding issue next year and the weighted funding formula isn't for 2 or 3 years, it's a longer term issue. So I think you're right. The sort of fiscally prudent decision, and maybe one of the most kind of straightforward decisions for us is that second option. I will say too, I just put forth those 3 options. They're not the only 3 options. So there could be we could flex a little bit off of some of those options, even just to pause, right? So there's been some question about, should we even just pause and let's learn more about this site before we make a further decision, but let's try to get into an alternative site as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you, all our school commissioners and Tom Flanagan. And we'll move on to our next topic. We have Kyle Dodson with us tonight from the Office of Police Transformation to give an update. I thought it'd be useful to read from the press release from the mayor about when he was appointed. The mayor announced that he's appointing Kyle the president and CEO of Greater Burlington YMCA. We all know him from there, to a new temporary position titled Director of Police Transformation to help lead the city's work to forge a new consensus on policing in Burlington. This work will include the oversight of the Burlington Police Department's planning, policy, and engagement efforts during a period in which the city is advancing a wide range of transformation efforts. So Kyle, we wanted to hear what your plans are and see if we can offer any input from wards 4 and 7. Thanks for attending.
That'd be great. Thank you, Jeff. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Just wanted to make sure. Good evening, everyone. I looked down the list of participants. I saw that I knew a reasonable number of you. So greetings to all, and hello to folks who I don't yet know. So I thought maybe I would just kind of walk through a little bit of what I've learned, how I'm starting to organize my thoughts, and then leave some opportunities for questions. Jeff, if I'm correct, I think you have me on for about 20 minutes.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. So the first thing is Jeff gave you a little primer from the announcement, but let me share a few other things. These are what I would argue are the structural, organizational change pieces that the mayor identified when he thought of a job. These are not exhaustive, but amongst them is looking into charter change, meaning looking how the management, I guess, and oversight of the police department is put together, particularly as it relates to discipline, and looking at what many municipalities and communities across the country are doing with greater civilian oversight. So they have boards, perhaps like our police commission, often with more teeth, or they are considering such, from anything as little as some involvement in police disciplinary issues to exclusive authority. That means that ultimately those situations will flow up through these bodies, and that they can hand down discipline where it has historically and traditionally been the chief of police who manages those issues. So we're looking at that here in Burlington. We're looking at new body camera footage policies as it relates to most sort of poignantly how we share that footage, how we organize it. You can imagine there's just reams and reams of footage. There's an issue of redacting to deal with issues of privacy, but what is the appropriate level of transparency? And then how do you arrive at that point from the standpoint of manpower to review all of the footage and redact it properly? We're looking at that. We're looking at an RFP, request for proposal for assessment of BPD. And a lot of these things, for the record, most of these things were in motion. They did not come on the table when I was hired. Many of them are involving city council members and the police commission and joint committees. So all these things were already in motion. The chief and the department are heavily involved. The chief's done a lot of the work. So I was brought on as potentially a catalyst, facilitator, and influencer, but these things are in motion. I think it's important people to know that. So we're trying to put together an RFP to ask an outside firm to come in and do an assessment of BPD. That will be in conjunction with the community assessment. That RFP went out already, and there have been some vendors have responded, and I believe we're in the process of choosing the actual person who will go out and get feedback from the community about what we want from policing. And then this RFP I just spoke about, the assessment, will say what we're currently doing in terms of policing and public safety. And then we'll put all that in the mix to decide where we want to go. Another piece is looking at, people know there's a resolution to decrease the budget of sworn officers that the BPD carries. It was 105, I believe, budgeted. We weren't at 105, but that's been brought down to 74 by attrition. And the chief just gave a presentation recently. I think we're at 87, but 2 of those are in the process of leaving. So we're really at 85 sworn officers and moving through attrition down to 74, which will free up some budgetary money. And then that one of the areas being looked at is community service liaisons or community service officers, but some function of people trained in social work, trained to help us with all of the mental health issues, and in theory, picking up work that currently is not always appropriate or most efficient and best use of resources to send out a highly trained, uniformed, gun-toting professional to do things that don't require that. So that's another thing. Use of force is something that's being looked at. Policies that govern how use of force plays out, how you move through a progression of intensified uses of force and expectations around that. So I gave all that just to point out that there's a lot in the mix. It does mirror things that are happening nationally. But after I looked at all that and I thought about what potential and hopeful skills and value I bring to the table, and certainly supporting that work is important. But I don't know if that's the thing that, yes. Can you folks hear me?
Yeah, we can. Could DC Murad, thanks. Go ahead, Kyle.
Okay, we're good.
Yep.
And so, so those were what I am arguing are the structural changes. But as I watch what's happening nationally and inevitably is happening here locally, we have a deep problem of mistrust. The trust between the community or parts of the community and policing and elected officials is in a pretty bad place. And if we are going to, my opinion is that the most valuable thing that I could help to support during my time is to lessen the chasm that currently exists between those bodies, move it to a healthy, more healthy dialogue, one where there's more trust, more good faith. We won't solve these challenges overnight. These challenges are big. There's a certain degree to which these challenges exist in really intense, amplified ways nationally, and the energy from those things impact our community in ways that I would argue aren't always things that the genesis or they're necessarily happening here to the same degree, but there's a sense of right now I don't think the pain and dissatisfaction in community is bound by geography or time. We're dealing with wounds, particularly when you're talking about the BIPOC community, Black, Indigenous, people of color community. This is a bit of a cumulative issue. We've been struggling with these issues in America for centuries, and each wound is cumulative. And so it's not a discrete issue. It's not what happened on Friday night on Church Street, but it's actually a cumulative issue, which is challenging. And I've spent, I'm embedded in the police department, and I get how being held accountable for everything that's ever happened is difficult. But whether one likes it or not, I do believe that's the moment we're in. So around that trust, what I'm trying to develop, I've talked at pretty significant length with the chief, and I'm talking inside, is I think that Burlington needs its own something akin to a truth and reconciliation process. I've done a little reading on it, and I'm a little bit of a student of what happened in South Africa with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. That has been replicated in many places, but for me, it's about healing. I hope that we can agree as a community and a nation that there's a deep wound as it relates to the ravages of racism, the way racism has played out in our community, the particular poignancy of racism when it plays out in policing. It's not everywhere all the time, but it doesn't need to be everywhere all the time to be something that's deeply problematic. And to the degree that we see racism in so many areas of American life, it just seems unreasonable to think that it doesn't exist in policing, since there's more than enough evidence. We just had the school district. We have an achievement gap. We have a wealth gap. We have a health disparity gap. And when you look at gaps, I would argue that you have two choices. Either there's something pervasive, systemic happening that is impacting Black and BIPOC communities, or Black and BIPOC folks are just inferior, predisposed to crime, less intelligent. Those are the two options. It doesn't make sense that a group of people would have the outcomes that we're experiencing in our communities unless there's an outside force that's contributing to it, or there's a deficiency within the community. And I hope that we're clear that there's not a reasonable conclusion to suggest that there's a deficiency within the community of folks of color. So this trust piece is not an easy one, but I hope that in our scale and scope and what we have here in Burlington, the capital we have of so many kinds, the good people we have here, and I think a police department that works really hard and has a lot of good people in it doing good work. As someone who's inside, I'd like to think that if we can figure it out, I don't have all those pieces in place, but I feel if we have the will, if we commit, if we are clear that what we want to do is have a healing process, then I think we can put the things in place. If we could do this healing process, then we can do what I think arguably is the equally important work, and that is increasing our dialogue and our sense of awareness of what happens in policing. One thing that's happened since I've been in the building is I would argue that police departments are a bit of a black box. Most of us have very little understanding of the real nitty-gritty of what happens in policing. I was in a training yesterday, and for the record, the department has been incredibly gracious. I feel welcomed. I've connected with folks. We have really good conversations internally, and there's a sense of generosity of people wanting me to understand what they do daily on a daily basis. So we had a training yesterday, full on. I had a gear belt. I had a training pistol and eye protection, the whole thing. And in the building there are places where you can set up scenarios, and we set up scenarios where we went in as officers. There were people in distress. Those people had weapons, and we just watched a video about the different ways that you can try to manage a situation like that, and we had to try to manage it. And it was really powerful to see the challenges that are that law enforcement face. And I think that part of the challenge we have is we don't have a broad enough and deep enough discussion in the community about what the job entails, independent of rogue cops, corrupt cops, racist cops. I think all those things exist, because they're human, like the rest of us. And all those things, I would argue, exist in any profession. So this thing certainly exists. I don't believe it's the majority. And even if we set those people aside, the people who are left, who are good people, people want to get home to their family at the end of the day, honest people, people trying to do a hard job, well, we just don't know. And we need to do a better job of community of owning the tensions. There are tensions that are really difficult to reconcile. And right now, I think it's left to police to reconcile them. And when those tensions go unreconciled and something tragic happens, police have to bear the brunt of a problem, which I think belongs much more broadly to society. So just to wrap up, and then I'd love to have a conversation, is there are the structural changes, all of which I think need consideration. They're in motion, and I'm doing the things I can to support those actions. I think at the end of the day, the issue is a trust issue. And on that, I just want to be clear. There are human beings all around. Police officers are human beings, the community are human beings, but the difference that I see is the police officer are professionals, and they have the law behind them, and they have guns. And that makes it different than the kind of pain that's being felt in the community at a collective level. At the individual level, when you're out there and you're scared and you're individual police officer, you're human, it starts to, the tables, change a little bit, particularly when the person on the other side has a weapon. But at the collective level, the societal level, the police are professionals with guns and the law. And therefore, I think it's appropriate that the lead on the healing happens institutionally, because the pain is a historical pain, and it's happened at the hands of institutions in America. Institutions have been unkind to the BIPOC community, and therefore I think that's where the healing needs to begin. So that's about the healing, and then once the healing begins, and hopefully we can develop some trust, we can have better conversations about this very difficult job, about how many people do it in a very admirable way, and about how we can together think of ways to provide public safety in our communities in a more thoughtful, equitable, and a way that satisfies more members of the community.
Thank you, Kyle. So let's get to questions. We can probably give 10 minutes of questions. TJ, I see you have your hand up.
Not so much a question, just Kyle, I really love what you just said, and I was really happy to see that you were the person here to accept that challenge that you've been into. I just feel like it's such a huge societal issue, like you were saying. It's how can there not be police officers who are white or BIPOC that have biases when you're raised in a society that has bias, right? You would be exceptional to not have that. So I really appreciate everything you've said. Thanks a lot, and I'm really excited to see the results of your and everyone's work. Thank you.
Thanks, TJ. And I just have to say, not only thank you, but I love this small community. The last time I saw TJ, we were hanging out at a hot tub in Gunkwit, Maine. And so here we are on, Zoom and our NPA. So nice to see you, TJ.
Any questions from folks? Kyle, is it still going to be a 6-month period that you're in this position?
It is a 6-month, and time, which is a thief, has us down to about 5 now.
Right.
So it'll end in the end of March.
All right. Well, I don't see other questions. Oh, Carol Odie, you have a question.
Yeah, it's not so much a question as just a comment, which is looking forward to working with you, Kyle. It's a great presentation, and with anything that we in the legislative end can do.
Thank you so much, Carol. I'm sure many of you are involved in conversations, and I think this issue is an amplified example of my belief that I can only imagine shared here, that if we can't figure out a better place and get there together with, any number of us having to go out on a limb a little bit, having to extend an olive branch, having to take a little bit of leap of faith. But if this small, caring, wonderful community can't do it, our nation is in so much trouble. I put that to us. I'm serious. I put that as a challenge. Let's figure this out. Let's do what we need to do. 40,000 strong, more with income, but relatively small place. I have no idea how Chicago and Detroit and Baltimore are going to figure this out, but that's on them. But I think we can do something meaningful here in our community, and it's not going to be easy, but it is doable. So let's get this done.
Matt.
I'll just add to what TJ and Carol said. I think you're the man to bring this about, Kyle. You've got a good heart and good enthusiasm, and you're intelligent. And I think there's just a lot of folks, you know, it's an uncomfortable conversation, and it's conversation that a lot of folks are ignorant about. And I don't say that in a negative way. I will admit I'm ignorant to a lot of things. I don't, in my little cocoon of life, working and running on the gerbil wheel, have a lot of these interactions or negative feelings. So it's good to bring it to light, I think, and somebody with some passion needs to stir the pot a little bit. So thank you.
Thanks, Matt. And I think part of what I'm trying to help people, I'm having conversations in the department. I think there's a path through this as it relates to how we own and navigate this issue of historic and continuing racism, right? It's sort of like an inheritance that you didn't ask for. When you have a nation that's behaved the way our nation has behaved, right? It is not long ago, mid-century, where you would have people watching a body hanging from a tree, and there was not on the people's face, there was not horror, or it seemed pretty regular. You shouldn't be able to see that as a human being. If you can look at that and not be impacted and go home, it's a trauma. That like whatever allowed our country to do that and do other things is deeply problematic. And unfortunately, we've inherited that. That's our history. So I think there's a path through this that's ownership and appreciation of being complicit without guilt. It's not an indictment to say that racism is within you. It's just a fact that it is the best marketing campaign ever. Nike and Apple can't hold a candle to the racism marketing campaign. It has been, this is a perverse way of putting it, but it has been a brilliant campaign to demonize, dehumanize, right, and other a group of people. And that's what we're facing. And so we just need to honor that, be humble in the face of that, and just understand that we can say, yes, this is happening without saying I'm a horrible person. The white person doesn't have to, you're not saying I'm a horrible person with malintent. You're saying you're human and being impacted by this powerful, powerful force. So if we can figure that out and then just have empathy and compassion and feel for the hurt of other people, you can, when someone's hurting, you can honor that hurt without saying I'm personally responsible for your hurt, right? That's not what you're necessarily saying. And I think we can figure that out and get some trust. And once we get trust, we can do all sorts of things, right? Communities, organizations move at the speed of trust.
That's awesome.
Carol, you had a question?
Yeah, I wanted to say that I made many phone calls in this campaign season because I can't go door to door because of COVID-19. And I just, what I heard at its base was a lot about what you were saying, Kyle, is people feel very badly and about racism, and they also are just kind of overwhelmed and it's like, okay, it's not my, I didn't do this. Getting blame out of it is a great thing to do, because that just puts a veil down. And so if we can just find a path forward, a way forward to take constructive action and understand what is systemic racism, what is structural racism, and how is it that the way things have been set up over time has made opportunity not equal for everybody. because, you know, at its heart, I think Americans want to believe in the American dream and equal opportunity and equal rights for all. So if we can see how it hasn't been equal, we can say, gee, I would never have wanted that. I haven't been a part of setting that up. Now, what can I do to make it better? And I think that to me, that's the key. So I'm glad you talked about no blame.
Yeah, I think you're right, Carolyn. And once again, it comes back to trust and the ability to speak our truths. And, you know, for me, truth and reconciliation is a metaphor for a type of process. Yesterday, as I mentioned, I was in this training with officers. There were about 10 of us. And we had, I would argue, one of the best conversations that's happened about policing, about BIPOC communities, about trust, about the breakdown. And it happened in a place where it was safe for people to be honest. And what it came down to is there's this very awkward phrase that is spoken more internally and externally. But with some of these tragedies that happen, this idea of lawful but awful, right? That police are responding to a situation, and within use of force guidelines and within the circumstance, the way they used force is legal within the guidelines, but the outcome is awful. For example, someone is doing a relatively low-level crime. They steal from a store, but when the police show up, they pull out a knife, and now it's escalated, and they don't comply. They have committed a crime; it's a fact, and they don't comply, and they behave in ways that escalate the situation. And you have someone, ultimately, if it escalates all the way, and the person approaches, and there's not enough distance, and they create a sense of mortal threat to the police shoot. So you could have a situation where someone's dead and they stole $25 worth of something from a store. That happens. That is awful. But often these are lawful. And so I was talking to the police, and they were defending these lawful but awfuls. And I said, okay, imagine you live in a community, of which there are no shortage in our country, and you have a situation where your cousin, your brother, your good friend, your uncle, some significant number of people in your orbit have died or been seriously injured in these lawful but awfuls. How would you feel? So we're getting down to how humans behave. And I looked at every officer in that room, and I defied them not to themselves have a challenge with the entity that created, or what it appears created, that situation, which in this case is the police. But I think those police officers are human beings. If they lived in these communities where these sort of things happen more often, and it happened to these contacts in their life, they would feel similarly about the entity that was on the other side, and would have a hard time having empathy and compassion for whatever the guidelines and rules were. All they know is that these people in their life are dead, and for things that did not seem to warrant death. And you know, that was kind of a conversation stopper. The officers had a whole bunch of ways that they were explaining, and they just stopped, and we all looked at each other. And I thought it was a pretty powerful and important moment of that's what we're looking at. That there's always perspectives. And so we just need to talk more as a community, hopefully in a good faith environment where we can grapple with these really difficult issues. We have some really difficult issues. Even if we can strip away racism and corruption and bias, we're going to be left with some difficult challenges to reconcile in a society where we want safety, and unfortunately crime happens, and it's dynamic. And so that's what we're dealing with. We can't make it simpler than it is. It's complex. So we got to go at it in a complex fashion.
Well, Kyle, I wanted to thank you and look forward to all the great work that you're going to do with all the parties and all of the city. So thank you for your time tonight. And it's a great dialogue. If you want to use the NPAs, ours in particular, I think it's a great avenue for getting the dialogue going like you did. So let us know if you guys want to come back.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Thanks for this opportunity. Thanks to everyone on the call. I really appreciate you listening in. And I will say in leaving, please become engaged. Be on the lookout. As I move through this, there's going to be lots of opportunities. One thing we definitely need is we need more Burlingtonians in on the conversation. Right now, the number of people deeply engaged is far too narrow. We need to know more about what all of Burlington is thinking. So please stay tuned and stay engaged. Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, next we have up DPW, Philip Peterson and Nicole Losh to give us an
Hello.
update.
Hello, Jeff. I'm going
Hi.
to share my screen here. Can I do that?
Sure.
Okay.
We're talking about some concept designs for Ethan Allen Parkway and North Ave intersection.
Yes, that is correct. Let's see here. Let's see if this decides to work. Okay, can everyone see the presentation?
Yes, I see Ethan Allen Park sign.
Excellent. Okay, I'm Philip Peterson. I'm an associate engineer with Department of Public Works, City of Burlington, and Nicole Loesch is with me as well. Try and get through the presentation as quickly as we can so that folks can make some comments. Nicole has a bit of some background on the project. Nicole?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for having us. You've got some important issues on your agenda tonight, so appreciate you making the time.
Absolutely.
We are here with some concepts for the intersection of North Avenue and Ethan Allen Parkway. And this study really came out as a continuation from the North Avenue corridor study and some of the roadway improvements that we've made there over the last several years. Immediately after we reallocated the travel lanes on North Avenue, we started looking at the other recommended projects that came out of the corridor study, and we had several intersection recommendations. In the midst of evaluating the corridor changes and hearing from the community about how things were going on North Avenue, after that project, we heard a lot about the section from Ethan Allen Parkway to the high school as probably the area with the most concern. We had these two intersection concepts for both the 127 intersection and Ethan Allen Parkway, but because they're fairly close together, both signalized and see the heaviest traffic volume of the entire corridor. We also have some challenging interactions at Ethan Allen Parkway with a heavy volume of right turning cars into the Ethan Allen Parkway neighborhood, people bicycling trying to go straight against that traffic, and people trying to cross in the crosswalk across Ethan Allen Parkway. We felt it was important to start with this intersection before looking at the 127 or any other intersections if we were going to pursue intersection improvements. All of that said, we've done the evaluation for these, some of the ways that we could improve the corridor, or sorry, improve that intersection, but one of those alternatives is to do nothing. You know, maybe we don't actually need to put all of our attention or limited resources into this location right now, and maybe this isn't the best time. And so that is very valuable feedback as well. So we did host another neighborhood meeting earlier this month to share this presentation. Good suggestion to bring it to the NPA as well. I know some of the people that attended that earlier meeting are here again tonight. And so just want to thank everybody who has participated in this so far and has provided some feedback. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Philip. We'll give this short presentation and try to continue the conversation and hear from more in the neighborhood.
Thanks, Nicole. So I will try and keep this brief so that we can get to your comments. Here's a brief agenda of what I'm going to be going through. So here are the existing conditions. And this is the intersection we're talking about. North is going up in this particular map. And as you can see from the existing conditions, and most of us who live in the New North End, I live in the New North End as well. This intersection, it does not have a normal layout. There are several issues. There are long pedestrian crossing distances. There are some sightline concerns. There's a driveway going into Ethan Allen Park that's part of the turning signal. That's not usually the case with most intersections, and road, Little Eagle Bay, being excluded. There's multiple turning movement combinations, and this causes more chances for conflicts of all road users. And there are, as Nicole already pointed out, some time periods with high volumes of traffic. So those are all things that we're looking at. Again, here's our existing conditions, our 5-way intersection. And one of our goals was safety. There are pedestrians, there's a lot of interaction between pedestrians going to the park and bicyclists coming from the park. And so our goals were to evaluate how this improvements, how would the cascading effects of this intersection improvement would align with the North Avenue corridor study. We wanted to improve the operations of the intersection, reduce vehicle queuing, and some safety improvements, and also reduce speeds of turning vehicles. In particular, one concern that of note is vehicles traveling at a high rate of speed on North Avenue turning onto Ethan Allen Parkway. That particular movement is one that's of particular concern. So here is our first concept. And the driveway to Ethan Allen Park is now going to be relocated further up Ethan Allen Parkway. There is a drawing for that. I don't have one tonight, but this simplifies the intersection's operation. And what we're doing here is we're going to include Little Eagle Bay in the signal. This work would include adding new signal heads. And I think this one change alone would improve safety from a simplification standpoint. We now have 4 legs at the intersection instead of the 5 that we currently have. And all of the roads are part of the signal instead of a driveway. We're reducing pedestrian crossing distances. This is particularly an improvement for the crosswalk going across Ethan Allen Parkway, where the entrance to the park has been removed slightly to the south. It's basically, we have significant property impacts either one way or the other. So the roundabout option cannot fit within the current public right-of-way. So it's important to note that turning movements in particular, the models have shown that all vehicle users can make the necessary turning movements in the roundabout. And I guess the big bummer for this particular option is the expense. The estimated cost would be about $2.5 million. So along with the concepts that we've just shown, we've had our consultants create a future traffic operations kind of guide. So just to kind of break things down, there's not a significant change between the alternatives. I think what's important to note is that the improvements at the intersections are safety improvements for pedestrians and bicyclists in particular. The vehicular improvements are minimal, and in some cases, as you can probably see in the chart here, there's a decrease in level of service. Having said that, there seems to be a safety improvement for vehicles as well. I think a lot of it has to do with the pedestrian interval that does not currently exist. The roundabout experience, on the other hand, is an improvement across the board. A reduced delay, improved traffic flow, no light to beat. Roundabouts are designed to promote a continuous circular flow of traffic. There's low travel speeds, and the few collisions that can occur in a roundabout are typically minor and cause few injuries or even damage, since they occur at such low speeds. So as I said, the major downfall for the roundabout option is the expense and the amount of space required to build it. So we've also created this alternatives comparison matrix. Red indicates kind of a negative or no change result, and green represents a positive result. And as you can see, the roundabout option hits all the marks except for costs and the amount of space needed. And so those are kind of our concepts and our options at this point. And as Nicole said, one thing that we can look at doing is no modifications at all. Just to summarize, we just to kind of acknowledge from our meeting last week, there's some highlights. Some of the folks that attended the meeting felt like we should give residents more context. Why are we looking at this particular intersection? But there was a general consensus that safety should be the focus. And so people seem excited about that. And also some of the feedback is there's an interest in more outreach to get more input from residents in the New North End. So with that, I'll take some questions or comments, and we'll take notes and see what we can do.
If anyone could chime in with a question, because I can't see everybody for hands with the presentation up.
I have a question.
Bob.
Philip or Nicole, in a lot of areas where there's broad access to a public highway, the state has forced the people that own the property to change their access point. My experience is a lot of the problems at that intersection develop from people coming in and out of Little Eagle Bay. Can't they be sort of instructed to do something different with their access point, so they're not coming out right in the middle of an uncontrolled intersection? In the morning particularly, it's like dangerous, but you already know that.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think we would be a little challenged to put this back on that neighborhood in particular, since, you know, years ago we permitted that development in this location. I mean, the intersection was already there. So I think at this point, our best option would be to just integrate their driveway into the signal. I think that's one of the biggest challenges, is that it is effectively an uncontrolled driveway in the middle of a signalized intersection. We haven't heard from many or any people directly in that neighborhood as part of this intersection evaluation, but in the corridor study, as we were developing that and thinking about some of the improvements near their driveway, we definitely heard from them and acknowledged some of the challenges that they have not being included in the signal. Everything from trying to turn left northbound across that heavy flow, you know, the left turn lane, as you can see in the graphic that's up now, is so far away from their driveway that, you know, if they miss the signal, they're kind of sitting in the middle of the intersection and confused. So I think the signalization part could be a great benefit to some of the issues that you raised. I don't know that we have a path forward to just put that cost and the design work back on the neighborhood, though.
Well, they used to have 2 access points there and they closed down one of them, right?
They did.
I think they could move it up a little bit more so that it would be, all you'd have to do is hang a new light, not necessarily do a lot of. Thanks.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I think recently you've made some improvements to that intersection, just with painting and the timing of the light. So I appreciate that. I'll sometimes walk north on North Avenue, and typically on the east side. And $500,000 seems like a lot of money to me. There's, you know, and I guess the entrance into the park would be further up Ethan Allen Parkway, which then those nice walls that they put up a long time ago for it would kind of be pointless. But my concern is with the crosswalk. I see you made it shorter to cross over Ethan Allen Parkway, but you also made it further in. So like right now, if I'm going north on the east side, I can look behind me and see if there's cars coming, and hopefully they have their signal on, you know, and see if they're actually going to turn right on Ethan Allen Parkway. But when you put the start of the crosswalk so far in, I can't, you know, I'm not going to be able to see oncoming vehicles.
Yep, I do see your concern there. That's good feedback. And these are just conceptual designs. We could definitely take a closer look at that crosswalk alignment if we were to move forward with that. But good to know the improvements that we've made so far have made some impact. So thank you for that.
Before we would construct something, we would definitely be checking for sightline issues, things like that. Okay. During design phase, if something was moved forward from concept, which this is, to engineering design phase, those things are definitely looked at. It's great input. I am typing down what you had to say there.
Okay. And I love Winooski Avenue. That must have gotten repainted within the last week.
Yeah.
Pretty close, yeah.
It's exciting.
I have some questions or comment, if I may.
Go ahead, Matt.
I feel that the biggest unimprovement when the improvement was made 2 years ago was the loss of the right-hand turn lane traveling north for vehicles to move onto Ethan Allen Parkway, and it slows traffic. And when I look at the design with a roundabout, if we consider Winooski's Indy 500, they have 2 lanes all the way around the racetrack. This only has 1 little narrow lane. And I just don't see how traffic is going to move and not just come to a standstill. Right now, I would say pre-COVID, when people were moving about life normally, coming home from the city between 5 and 6, traffic already backs up to the high school, and it's stop and go, bumper to bumper. And it never was that way before. So I think it's going to be even worse if we consider the roundabout. It seems like a good idea in principle, but I just don't see how it's actually going to work. I would say the only real improvement would be your notion of putting back a right-hand turn lane. And I think it's a really good idea to relocate the driveway to the park. I don't know how Little Eagle Bay would change, but with this intersection, with some new lighting and a right-hand turn lane, it seems like that would incorporate Little Eagle Bay with a signal and a right-hand turn lane, and traffic will move. And I don't think that will be at risk of safety for pedestrians.
So Matt, at what time of day is it bumper to bumper?
The 5 o'clock return from home is what I've seen, not during COVID, but
Okay.
rewind before COVID, and it was
okay. I mean, I live on Birch Court, so I get the whole stretch. And I guess even prior to COVID or even now, I haven't really had that experience.
I haven't had any experience since COVID, but I also haven't been out.
Me neither.
But take away COVID. I mean, literally the few times that I was in a normal pattern of going home and everybody else was, I literally feared that there was a terrible accident. And each tricked me, and the further and further up the avenue I would go in my vehicle, the more I would realize this is just 1 lane on North Avenue. It's nothing to do with an accident. It's just the road design.
Is there a reason not to include the intersection that's, 100 yards away and the one that's a mile up the road at Plattsburgh Avenue in this discussion?
Those are definitely in the queue for future evaluations. We definitely don't have the funding to construct 3 intersections all at once. So we have to start with 1. We do have concepts though for the other locations. And in terms of the 127 intersection that is so close to this one, similar to some of the concerns that Matt shared, when we started thinking about, again, focusing on this section of the corridor where it had the most traffic, if we were picking between those 2 intersections, we had some concern that if we looked at an intersection improvement plan for the 127 that did really help some of that congestion and capacity, would the traffic even have anywhere to go at Ethan Allen Parkway? So should we look at this intersection first to see if there were some improvements we could make to streamline the whole corridor? So that was the main reason for starting at this location and then coming back to think about the other intersections.
Jeff? Hey, Jeff?
Hey, Jeff.
I've got some queue notes that looks like Shireen Hart, Sarah Carpenter, and Carol Odie are in the queue.
Okay.
Thanks.
Shireen, would you like to go first?
Hey everyone, this is Chip, not Shireen. I didn't just have to change my pronouns. she knew that I would want to see this presentation. I'm grateful to DPW for doing this. And just a quick perspective. I grew up in the New North End. I've lived out here, except for when I was in college now for 50 years. I've also been working Winooski for 20 plus, and I was there before the roundabout, and I'm there now, and I've driven into the North End, into Winooski thousands of times. And I will tell you, Matt, on one hand, I will agree with you. I think the traffic challenge is the loss of the right-hand turn lane. But I'm personally convinced that a roundabout would eliminate this issue right away, because someone would get to the roundabout and they're not going to be blocked by someone going around the roundabout, except for really occasionally. We can debate the finer points of it, but we can talk about it later. But I'm actually convinced it would have a substantial positive impact on the flow. So my questions are this. or well, let me also say before I ask quick questions, I also agree with Monica. I think you are going to have to watch where the placement of the pedestrian crossing is on Ethan Allen Drive. I've crossed there hundreds of times on foot and on bike, and you have to look as you're going north. You have to look over your left shoulder very, very carefully and have a car in the distance. And if we hide a pedestrian around that corner, we're going to need some room. But you have all kinds of engineering fun challenges, especially with the private property. I realize that. My question is twofold, or it's the same question, but with two spots. I know that you can't, we obviously can't address all three of these intersections at once. And, but one thing I wonder is, let's pretend for a moment that we come up with a way to move cars through this intersection going north and south really nicely. Let's say a roundabout does it. Do we know what effect that will have on the 127 light in particular going south? Because one of the things I'm afraid of, I come out of Village Green, and as most of us who live in that neighborhood know, you can't. You go down to Saratoga, all right? And one of the things I'd be afraid of is that enough traffic now gets through the Ethan Allen intersection and 127 gets backed up. You know, so the consequence of opening up this flow, I wonder if it gets backed up further down. One thing I do know is people are challenged by the Winooski roundabout because, you know, change is difficult. And even though I think it's awesome, it makes all the sense in the world, one thing that we might want to teach people coming out of, for example, the Village Green neighborhood, is they can now easily, instead of waiting, you know, we saw in Front Porch Forum, someone claimed to wait 10 minutes to get out of that neighborhood, which is not true, but, you know, it's just not. But they can now easily just take a right. And you can take a right and be around the roundabout and going south in 30 seconds. And that might be a way to look at what happens with the flow as well. So, so my question is, do we have a sense of what the impact of the additional flow will be on the 127 light and for people who are trying to turn left out of the Village Green neighborhood? And you may not have that now. I'd be surprised if you did, actually. I just wanted to put that out there as something to look at when you consider this.
Yeah, it's a great question. And you're right, we haven't not delved into that level of detail yet. Before we really got too far in either the design work or the evaluation with any of these alternatives, we did want to, you know, come out to the community and really see if there was that much interest. That said, if the roundabout was the alternative that we wanted to pursue, we would definitely look at how it would potentially line up with a signalized intersection at the 127, because as you said, we wouldn't want to construct something this location that's just going to cause cars to spill back into the roundabout from the 127.
The only time that the Winooski roundabout fails design-wise is when the northbound entrance to 87 all the way up by Costco gets backed up all the way down the hill. Yeah. Then the roundabout stops. And the original design of the roundabout, or for the first couple of weeks, they did have 2 full running lanes, and it actually worked. But they changed it for some other reasons, and so now that's the only time it could get backed up. And that's the thing I wouldn't want to see. We dump all these cars south of this potential roundabout, and it gets backed up, and you know, everyone here will never hear the end of it.
Yeah, it's a great question. And just to be clear too, the recommended concept for the 127 intersection was also to evaluate a roundabout.
Oh, well, that's awesome.
Yeah, so
you have space there too.
Yes, we definitely have less property impacts at that location, since we have closed 2 of the turn lane ramps that used to be there. And so we do have a lot more space, but that could be a solution to that concern about.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I appreciate it.
We are going over, but if others wanted quick questions. Sarah, I know, and Carol has one, and I see TJ. Is that it? And then we'll call it a night.
Thanks. A comment and a question. I hear you don't talk at all about Lakewood, and maybe we need to be louder. There are more people that live in Lakewood than live in Little Eagle Bay. And if you add Leonard to that, so there's a lot of people who really struggle to try to go north. So just in your signalization and any of your concepts, I just encourage you to make sure that that's taken into consideration. And my first reaction to a roundabout was that would make it even more difficult. Chip has a valid point. I guess you can go south to go north. But my other comment, just as my city councilor hat, the $2 million additional price tag at this point in time would weigh heavy, certainly on me, given our capital needs priorities. So I would be thinking long and hard about, is this the right time for that kind of investment? Thanks.
Carol?
Mine is just that 4 years ago when I was going door to door, and the issue of the 4 lanes to 2 lanes was a very big issue. I had many comments about concerns about people on bikes. And it turned out when I would follow up with where did you find the most problems, almost everyone identified places not in the New North End, except for one place, and it's at this intersection that we're talking about tonight. And I think it is when the person was coming out of Ethan Allen Road and wanted to take a right to go north on North Avenue. And the bicycle was going to go straight, which was across the road, and they were going to go right. And that they almost got in an accident there. And that was one story, and there was another story, and I don't remember exactly what the points were on that one, but the bicycle thing was the biggest thing that I heard about there. So that's all I wanted to say.
And TJ?
Thank you. So Matt and I have lots of these conversations, and I actually disagree with you, Matt, here about, I like the idea of a roundabout a lot. I'm originally from New Jersey, and there were tons of roundabouts, but I also travel around the state of Vermont a lot because I work in lots of different schools. And there's one roundabout in particular, or maybe 2 in the Montpelier area. One is near the Ford dealer. I think that might be Route 5 maybe, but it was a nasty intersection. And it's the smallest little roundabout, but it's so effective. I've never once, any time of the day, ever driven through there and been backed up by traffic, never once. And I used to remember sitting at that light, it was awful. So I fully support roundabouts, and I really like the idea of moving the entrance to the Ethan Allen Park. It seems like a really poor placement, although I like how you incorporated like bike path, walking path to keep that stone wall. But otherwise it seems like a bad place for that entrance. So those are just my comments about it. Thank you for this presentation.
It wouldn't be a complete Ward 407 NPA meeting without asking when you're going to pave North Avenue.
I think actually we may have some good news on that. This did come up at our last meeting too.
Did.
We checked the schedule, and at least as of now, it is in the schedule to be repaved next year. Obviously, we'll have to check after winter deterioration to see if some other route fell apart more than North Ave, but currently that is.
There can't be.
I don't know about that.
Will they be taking the wading pools out?
Yes, they did some drainage evaluation and survey work this year to try to solve some of the drainage problems when they repave next year.
Excellent.
For the bikes.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, everybody. It was a great meeting. Thanks
Thank you.
for participating. Let us know what you'd like on the agenda, or please join the steering committee. Have a good
It was
night.
a great meeting. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
For
Thanks,
organizing
everyone.
it.
Thanks, guys. Have a good night.
Thanks, Jeff, for facilitating.